Welcome to the Environmental Leadership Chronicles, a podcast brought to you by the California Association of Environmental Professionals. In this episode, we feature Meredith Reynolds, the Special Deputy City Manager for Recovery for the City of Long Beach. Meredith has worked on critical efforts in community services, parks and open space, sustainability, and innovation in Long Beach and in Irvine. She has served as the Long Beach Park Planning and Partnerships Manager and Park Development Officer, where she created a strong focus on equitable and inclusive community engagement and partnerships and developed park and open space projects. During the pandemic, Meredith was reassigned to the Long Beach Health Department and was responsible for setting up COVID-19 testing sites across the city of Long Beach. She also oversees the Long Beach Management Assistant Program, a local government management fellowship program currently accepting applications through January 17th, 2022. Find more information at longbeach.gov. We hope you enjoy hearing from Meredith. Hi, I'm Jessa.
And I'm Laurel, and today's guest is Meredith Reynolds with the City of Long Beach. We are so excited to have you. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you.
And we'll start by asking how you're connected to AEP.
Sure. I'm connected to AEP because I say yes to a lot of things, yes to my colleagues. So I was one of the speakers at AEP's conference here in Long Beach in 2021, and I shared my park story about my favorite park, Willow Springs. And so spent a lot of time getting to know some folks at the conference, which was really great. But I do have a long career in the sphere of park planning and sustainability, and have often run into members of AEP or others just generally in the profession. And so that's sort of my connection and entree into kind of this work.
We appreciate you saying yes to things. It was, I was at the conference in Long Beach and people came up to me and said, you got to interview Meredith on the podcast. Her talk was so engaging and inspiring and enlightening. And as we were preparing for this episode, you mentioned that this particular park is a passion of yours. And I did not get to attend your session. So lay it on me. What is this fabulous park and why are you so passionate about it?
So this park is just really unique. There's not a lot of places that exist like this in Long Beach and probably in Southern California. So it is about 48 acres, centrally located in Long Beach, just off of the 405 freeway, pretty much smack dab in the middle of our city. And most of it's undeveloped, and it's been that way for over 100 years. It happened to be the location of the first artesian spring that fed water to the town site before Long Beach was Long Beach. So it really provided that, that foundation of and life for agriculture for people. And at the time in the 20s, the mayor wanted to do a huge Central Park-like plan. And they commissioned a husband and wife architect from Pasadena. And you never heard of female architects in the 20s, so that was kind of cool. And they did this whole master plan, and it was hundreds of acres and included most of the Long Beach airport and a big chunk of the central part of our city before it was, part of the town site. And then oil was discovered, a block away, and they shelved the plan, and that was just kind of where it sat. And so more recently, in the 2000s, there was plans for a sports park, but there's all kinds of oil infrastructure there, and it just became cost prohibitive. And eventually, as we were moving out of our city hall to our new city hall building, we found the 1920s plans in a wheelbarrow, in a closet, in the basement of the old city hall. And we've been working through from 2010 on. We have a master plan for the park from 2013. And we have a variety of grants we've gotten to kind of build out sections. And we finally found this missing piece of these 100-year-old plans and blueprints. They're gorgeous. We have them framed and everything. And we've been working this whole time to come kind of full circle and develop this park and this plan that we had no idea existed, and kind of fulfill that promise from 100 years ago, from 1921. So it's kind of neat to see it. And it's a great sandbox for sustainability. So all of the aspects of the park are really built around the concept of light touch to the land, let the topography dictate the features. You can imagine an abandoned, kind of a vacant, abandoned open space site for 100 years has a lot of found objects. So a lot of recycled concrete and things we made into pavers and a little outdoor classroom. Because it used to be the area for the artesian spring, a lot of willows just naturally volunteer. So we did some cuttings off of what we lovingly call the grandmother willow. And those have taken up along the path. And so it's a very natural space with lots of topography. So if you walk in there, you don't feel like you're in Southern California. You feel like you're in some, quiet respite where you can hear the birds, you hear the wind through the trees. We have a walking path, a labyrinth, we have a trail, we have a watershed map, some interpretive signage of all the history on the park. There's really no place like it in Long Beach. And it just happens to be part of the park is the highest publicly accessible vista point in Long Beach. So you can see the Hollywood sign on a clear day, you can see Orange County, you can see Catalina, you have a great 360 view of this park. And not a lot of cities can boast that they have such a resource. It's really just a matter of us continuing that commitment to finding grants and other funds to really build out the balance of the park. And so we're super excited about that. So I could talk about this all day. It's my favorite park for all of those and more reasons. But it was a lot of fun to be able to share that with those who attended the conference in Long Beach. And several folks said, oh yeah, on my way home, I'm going to go buy it. So I hope they did.
For sure.
That's what I was thinking right now. I'm like, oh, I haven't seen this. And if I have, I wasn't paying attention. So I love it. What an amazing story. Sorry, Laurel.
Yeah,
I was like, I'm like, oh.
It's a lot of fun.
And it sounds like it was a really fun role. Tell us like what your role was in the project and how you got there in your career. Cause I'm sure it's fascinating for people that are like, I want to do what she did. How did you find yourself here?
Sure. So my role for in that project and for the city for the last several years has been the park planning and partnerships manager. So was responsible for your more traditional kind of park planning and funding planning. We did all the grant writing for capital projects for parks, and also all of the partnerships and other kind of land use related permits and contracts in the Department of Parks, Recreation, and Marine for the city of Long Beach, and sort of found my way to this area of work from a place that maybe many others don't really have. So I grew up in a small agricultural town in the Central Valley where my father was a city manager. And so my first council meeting was at 6 when a babysitter didn't show up. And I just thought it was the coolest thing. And I've been a local government nerd ever since. And so for me, it was more about, this is, if your water doesn't turn on, if your dog is lost, if you get a parking ticket, like you don't go to the federal government, you don't go to the state government, you don't go to the county, you go to your local jurisdiction. And so much of your life is wrapped up in your relationship to your local government, even who you vote for city council or what have you. And so it always struck me as the kind of most direct way to provide support and change for a community. And, growing up in that household, my mom was also a social worker, worked for public health. Like we had a very specific call, my sister and I have a very specific call to service. And so this was kind of the family business. This is where I was going to end up. It's what I felt like I was good at, what I understood. And certainly found that this was the way to make the most direct impact and direct change and interface most closely with the community who could be influencing local politics and local processes for change in their own right. And it just felt really comfortable. So that's kind of where I started. And outside of undergrad and graduate program, I was looking for kind of a local government fellowship program, and many cities have them. Long Beach happens to have one. So I started my career with the city of Long Beach in their management assistant program. Come full circle, kind of side note, I manage that program today. So it's kind of fun that I started there and now in
That's
my
awesome.
in my deputy city manager role, I oversee that. But, I was an analyst in development services, kind of planning, building, redevelopment, housing. Great spot for me because I got to learn a lot. But I also then had some reflection about like, really, who did I want to be in my career? Like what kind of work was going to be important? And so, you kind of think through the scenarios as an analyst. There's analysts in every department, all 22 departments at our city. We're a full service city, about 6,000 employees. So do I want to work in the fire department? Do I want to work in the police department? And there's certain aspects of that work that's really exciting. There's also certain aspects of that work that doesn't really speak to me and my values and what I wanted to stand for as an employee, as a professional. Do you work in the library? Do you work in neighborhood services? And so I really did some soul searching and said, I think I'm best positioned just with my own personal values and the kinds of things I want to accomplish and the things that seem interesting to me, like the things that I want to spring out of bed every morning and come to work, are really around kind of open space, parks, sustainability, and the planning and implementation that comes with that. So, planning and capital projects and, some of the, environmental things that we have to deal with as a coastal city, as a city with a history of land degradation. There's a lot, to impact there and a lot of value that I feel I could add. So I kind of started to look for those roles in that area. And I got tapped. There's some movement in our leadership at the city, and I got tapped by our city management team to start the city sustainability office. So we didn't have one up until that point. And so they said, "Hey, do you want to come start this?" And you've heard me. I say yes to stuff.
So I was thinking that same thing. And okay, we know where this is going. Yes,
this is yeah. There's a pattern here. So I said yes, and a colleague of mine who also has been very pivotal at the Willow Springs site, my colleague Larry Rich, who is still today the city's sustainability coordinator, essentially created this office from scratch. It was at a time where this was kind of the latest and greatest buzz, and kind of turning from like the environmental movement into sustainability, which has more lately become resiliency and climate change. We started a lot of that at the city. So some of our green building policies, our construction and demolition debris recycling policy, our green purchasing policy. We had established the first sustainable city action plan, and our mayor appointed a commission, a sustainable city commission that we chaired. All of that work still exists today and has been morphed into other things. And still, the sustainability plan still stands alone. A lot of that got incorporated into our climate action and adaptation plan. So there's lots of that kind of stuff, that I'm really proud of that still exists for our community. But I had an opportunity to go work after that for the city of Irvine. And that was a really interesting experience because I could not have picked a more different city. When I started, they were celebrating their 40th anniversary. Long Beach is, hundreds of years old. They're a master plan community. They were pretty much fully entitled from land use standpoint when I started there. They have essentially one developer, the Irvine Company. Here we have just whoever feels like they can make a financial arrangement work to develop. There's so many more like differences that I can go on, but it was, they're one of the more well-run cities in the country. And that was really interesting to see how leadership kind of dealt with that environment. And when I first started, a lot of my leadership left very quickly. So I ended up being in charge of a lot of stuff. So I started as the environmental programs administrator. So I oversaw their waste contracts, their recycling programs, their community outreach, their open space permits with the federal government, and a variety of other things, but then swiftly became in charge of maintenance and capital projects, land use permits and cell sites and a bunch of other things. And it was all very interesting. So I got a lot of really great experience there. And so I was commuting, and I've never done that before. And I didn't really think about how kind of just saying, all right, I'm leaving my city and I'm going to go to another city. I'm going to help them. At the end of the day, I do the same thing. I kind of wash my hands and go home. And it felt really impersonal. And that started to really weigh heavy on me. And so I was like, I need to come back to Long Beach. This is my home. It's weird. It's funky. It's cool. It's right by the beach. Like I love everything about it. And so many, you'll find people who live in Long Beach just love it. And so I came back as the park planning and partnerships officer and then got promoted to manager. And was responsible for park planning for 167 parks, 6 miles of beach. About 1/10 or so percent of our city is open space. And so people don't realize how many parks we actually do have.
Yeah.
So millions of dollars of grant funds and a variety of other stuff that was just really, really meaningful to me, and I got to do it in my city. So that's one of the kind of the really helpful pieces of this, is like living where you work. For me, I realized was really important. So I'm really glad I get to do that. And then finally, I think recently I just got tapped as the deputy city manager for recovery, which has nothing to do with environmental or planning or parks or anything. But, as when people ask you to do something really important, you say yes. And that's what I did. And I was reassigned during COVID to our health department to stand up our city's COVID testing sites. And so I think I would assume part of that, was something that showed folks I could do something different, which was kind of a silver lining for me. But I get to kind of see the larger picture here at the city, which is really helpful. And I still get to be an advocate and user of our park space. And, you never know, might come back someday. So,
yeah, I think that's just a brilliant story of getting to work and invest your time and your love into the community in which you grew up, and to grow into a leadership role. And then now all of a sudden not all of a sudden, but now you get to be, special deputy city manager for recovery. And it's different than what you had anticipated your trajectory to possibly be. But what are what goes into being responsible for implementing the Long Beach Recovery Act? Because I don't have a lot of experience or knowledge or understanding of what that entails. Walk us through what you do on a day-to-day, and what are some of the big projects, obviously COVID-19, but what are some of the other big projects that you work on?
Sure. Part of this role is a little bit of a choose your own adventure. Very similar. I had to remember, very similar to when I was in the sustainability office. Like, this didn't exist before, and you have to essentially set up a functional office and then do the work of that office and evaluate the work of that office and make sure it's in alignment with, in this case, city council policy, federal funding priorities, et cetera. So that's kind of what we've been spending our time doing. And so our city has received, through the federal ARPA funding and a variety of other grants, recovery related grants, $249.2 million, which in many cases is the entire budget of many small cities in California. And we're responsible for producing programs and implementing those programs through the end of 2024 that are really focused on recovery in kind of two main categories. One is economic recovery, and one is healthy and safe communities, sort of the public health and violence prevention areas of programs. And so our kind of day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month work is establishing policies and procedures around how the funding will be spent and what we will be spending it on. And we have a lot of guidance from that, because our city council in March was one of the first cities in the country to approve a local recovery plan. So we have, our foundation and our framework for what is important to our community and our council. And then from there, policies and procedures and all of the logistical pieces, the internal pieces that many people don't see, of making sure that happens. So hiring the staff to do this, that's no small feat. Particularly when local government hiring can be a little bit slow, and also when there is a huge opportunity in the kind of vacuum in the job market. It is establishing all of the accounting codes in our financial system and figuring out how you want to track it at the end of the day, and backing into how it all gets set up. Thinking about how we communicate to our council, to the federal government, to our community, how we're spending the money and what our progress looks like, and making sure that is done in accessible ways, in ways that accomplishes language access. We have a very strong majority of our population that is Hispanic, Spanish, Khmer, and Tagalog speaking. And so how do we make sure that we're still providing accessibility and accessible information to them? And then also, how do we convene teams around this concept of collective impact? So all of these programs are mutually reinforcing to maximize the benefit and ultimately recovery for our community. So for instance, if we have a universal basic income program, which is planned with some of these funds, how do we also get that individual or that household connected to diapers and formula for their children? Some of the after school programs at parks and libraries, some of the transportation subsidies through micro mobility and transit, the free Wi-Fi and computers that will allow for their children to go to school or for them to access training. How do we think about all that? And so it quickly becomes 7-dimensional chess. But it's one of those things that your role, our office's role, is to sort of be the backbone for that collective impact, to lead all of that work, and organize and convene staff teams to problem solve and sort of figure that out. And so it's a lot about setting up the structure to make sure that we're successful, that the impacts and results in our community that we expect actually come to fruition.
Meredith, this is unbelievable. I am positively overwhelmed and inspired by your ambition and your commitment to your community and following your purpose and your passion. And listening to you speak about this, I would think this sounds like a dream opportunity for a way to directly impact and help the people in your community. Like, it just, as Laura would say, and me now, like, it gives me chills, and I never get real chills, but I have them right now because I'm just like, wow, this is just, like you're saying, like all these like day-to-day things that impact the quality of life for the residents of your community. And you're running the show and the program and making it efficient.
Yeah. And one of the things that I thought about, when really thinking through, as opposed to just saying yes, really thinking through how, whether or not this was a good role for me, is I was very, very used to being in the field. At the parks office, it's at our regional park. I look out and I have a ball field and a skate park and some open space. It's really great. And I was also used to being in a place where I had a really tangible role, right? I plan a park. I and others plan a park. I and others design a park. We get our environmental clearances. We get our permits. Someone builds the park. There are smiling, laughing children on that playground at that park. That is very, very tangible. This work is far less tangible in a very direct way, but far more kind of exponentially more impactful if done right. So I have to remember kind of my intrinsic motivation for, yes, that form I just signed, or that email that I just sent, or that meeting I'm going to have, doesn't feel very tangible right now. But again, if we're doing this well, if we are really thinking about equitable impacts to those who were disproportionately affected by COVID, if we're really doing this well, then that form I just signed, that email I just sent, that meeting I just had really results in long-term recovery. And as a resident, I'm really invested in that. As a professional, this is exactly kind of that dream job. Like, you really, really hope you get a chance to have this kind of an impact, even if you're behind the scenes, no matter how big and how small. So it's been kind of a wild ride since I started, I think in April or May of this year. So it's been a lot.
It's a lot. Yeah. Like, I too am also positively motivated and overwhelmed. And I'm interested to know, how do you take care of yourself and maintain that positive attitude? I know that, like, you consciously think about, okay, I send this email, I complete this form, it's for the bigger purpose. How else do you take care of yourself in maybe other ways that directly influence how you're able to stay healthy and motivated in this very intense, demanding, and fulfilling role?
Yeah. I probably am like others, where I whatever you want to call it, whether it's your work-life balance or your rhythm or what have you, like, I'm probably not the healthiest person in that regard, because so much of what I do and so much of who I am is wrapped up in what I do. This is all, it's really all encompassing. And I feel like that probably started back, from my family influence, that this is kind of our family business, right? But I think there's a couple like really important things that I do and I encourage others to do is one is just surround yourself with people that you enjoy. Whether it's my husband and my lazy coworker of a dog over here. She's a really sweet, spoiled beagle who is usually upside down on some couch somewhere as I'm working away.
We love dogs.
I know the benefits of work from home. If she makes a cameo, I wouldn't be surprised. And the other thing is, I talk about at work my coalition of the willing. Like these are the people that I surround myself with at work because we have mutual values. We have mutual kind of interest and are inspired by similar things. When I call them with a problem or a question or just like, hey, I need advice, like they don't tell me how busy they are. They stop what they're doing, they put their pencil down, they stop their email and they're like, how can I help? And it's, like mutually exchanged. They do the same with me. They show up to the stuff that I'm passionate about. They give their time or other resources to causes that are mutually important. They show up, they celebrate you and they're like, they hype you. That's kind of fun. So I have a lot of those people, particularly who I work with, and I really try and cultivate those relationships and ensure that they feel special in return. And that goes a long way in terms of kind of motivation and keeping a good kind of head on your shoulders and having good mental health. We have 167 parks and 6 miles of beach. I am in them and at them regularly. That's just, kind of, I was a big parks kid and that kind of has never stopped. And I think, really being intentional about planning your time off. So we lose more time as Americans that we earn than we actually take. And so when we spend the majority of our waking hours at work, we might as well like what we do and who we do it with, but we should also be using those earned benefits. So usually every year in December, I sit down with my husband and we think about like, okay, where do we want to go and when? And we're pretty regular vacation takers. Like we take vacation around my birthday in January because nothing ever good happens when you work on your birthday. Take it from me.
When is your birthday?
My birthday is January 8th. So I was born on Elvis's birthday.
Yeah. I'm January 29th. I was hoping that we'd be, fellow birthdayians and Aquarians, but you've got Elvis that you got that energy.
Elvis and David Bowie. So I'm pretty stoked about that.
Do you have music in your life? Are you a musician?
Oh yes. Well, that was the last thing I was going to mention is I play the piano. I've been in band and drumline and things as a youth. But I definitely think like music is my like escape. It's my go-to. I love live music. I have a record player and all the records. I am like a super nerd on Spotify. I make playlists for people all the time. Like if there was a mixtape and that still existed, I would still do that. But now it's become, this online feature. Totally. And so I really enjoy that. And so those are some of the types of things, that we do and really being intentional about taking that time is really important because you need the time to kind of rest and regroup, relax and that sort of thing. And there's always wine for therapy, right? That's always up there on the list somewhere.
Yeah. Yes.
Oh yeah. Thank you for sharing. And thank you also too, for bringing up the time off, because I do think that is such a critical thing for us to remember because, I think a lot of people who are passionate about their careers and focused on it and are so purpose-driven, you get so intertwined and the lines are blurred between work and personal. And so being intentional about taking the time off, because that's when like creativity happens. That's when you can really, truly rest and come back and show up even more for what you want to do. So I love that piece of advice because it is something I think we all need to focus on more. And
take your vacation
and unplug.
Yes, unplug.
And like the times of Zoom, you can be anywhere now. And it's like, okay, but yeah, turn off the computer.
Yeah, just log off of Teams. It's okay. The other thing I'll say though, Jessa, is as I get older and like different levels of my career, part of this is your staff watching your behavior, right? And so like normalize taking time off and not bugging your staff. Normalize, not coming to work when you're sick. I think everyone is on board with that these days. I hope. Some of the things that you may have kind of skipped for yourself before starts to say certain things to the people who work for you or the people who work around you. And if you're doing all of this stuff and you're not taking vacation, others tend to think that like that's what you expect and that's what they should be doing. And you're passing down bad habits to the next generation of employees. And I don't want to do that. Like, so I have to be very, very conscious about, the things that I do. And we have, we talk about every year. I ask my team for when they're planning to take time off, even if they don't, know right then and there. Like, this is why I have deadlines of when I want to know, before the summer, because a lot of my staff have kids and, summer's off and how are they planning for that? And what time are they taking? And, before the holidays, regardless of what you celebrate, like when do you plan to take time off? And so we talk about that. And that, I think that helps kind of normalize the intentionality behind taking some of that time. There's a whole bunch of other things that are unrelated to the question that we try and normalize just so it's okay, if your cat is sick, like stay home, like work from home, it's fine. We also normalize waving at the end of every call because I do it and I think it's cool and I love it. And I hope everybody else does it too. I know Laurel's waving at me. There's just things that you can have a little bit of fun with too. Just being really intentional about what is meaningful for your team, because part of being in a leadership role is other people looking at you, and you don't want to carry down those bad habits that maybe you grew up with because you worked for others who, did certain things with certain kind of gave you certain cues that was what was expected.
Yeah, that is really, really important reminder or something to highlight for leaders, because I think that, again, we can get so caught up in what we're doing that we forget people are watching how we act and emulating that in their career. And I think for some people it's more intuitive and some people it's learned. And so I just admire the way that you approach it with your team. And something I was thinking about as you're speaking and thinking about all this being so intentional and like having all these opportunities and saying yes, and that you now are leading this fellowship program that you started in, is what is some advice, or what are some things you look for fellows who are coming out of this program or applying, or that you're working with? So people who are earlier in their career, like what are some things that you keep an eye out for?
Sure. So the program is the Long Beach Management Assistant Program, and it's a 1-year fellowship for those who have their master's degree. And we bring on usually it's pretty competitive, but 2 and 4 fellows each year, and they get rotated through 4 different departments. So they have to go through budget, they have to go through city manager's office, but the other 2 are sort of like electives where we ask what their interests are, and the departments actually pitch projects for them. And so we figure out what their interests are in the desired projects, and we kind of match them up. And there's also a lot of, other kinds of, they go to every city council meeting. They volunteer. I shouldn't say volunteer. They, as part of their role, they show up for these other things like the homeless count or the bike count, or, help set up for a community meeting, or like right now they were helping this week with redistricting. So they get kind of a full like local government experience. And so we're looking for people who align with the values of the organization, align with the values of the work at the local level. Over the years, some of the criteria has shifted a little bit from like, the ultimate local government person. And now it's kind of shifted, someone who has like the criteria that says they want to work in local government. That's all they've ever wanted to do. Now we're looking for people with a little bit more diversity of thought, diversity of degrees. So we've had planners, we've had, public works, capital project kind of, construction type folks. We've had public health folks. We've had communications and PIO marketing type folks. And so we have kind of shifted over to maybe a more diverse perspective. and even demographically diverse individuals as well. And so the program, as we've seen in the last few years, we've seen a lot more folks from the local metropolitan region, as opposed to like the big rock stars out of, these colleges far, far away. We like people who want to stay with our organization, because this is all about building the capacity and succession planning for local government. And that's not to say that people can't go learn that this is not for them and go do something else or go to another organization. But, we boast a lot of our city leaders came from this program. Tom Modica, our city manager, started the program a few years before I did. So there's a lot of folks at all levels coming from this program, which is great. And I will put a plug in that the program is open. The recruitment is on now. And you can visit that on our website at longbeach.gov /MAP for Management Assistant Program. And the applications close in January. So Laurel and Jess, I'll get that information over to you as well. But it's the longest running municipal management fellowship in California. And I believe it's the second oldest in the country, next to the city of Phoenix.
Wow. I mean, I love all the things. I especially love the opportunity for individuals to test their interests. Oh, my microphone switched. Hold on. Technical error. Sorry about that.
Okay, so now it switched before we could actually hear you. So I was like, oh, I think your mic is actually working great, but
testing.
What do I know? Yes.
Apologies, technical blips. I was saying that I really like the opportunity for people to test out if something's going to be meaningful for them or not before they invest, years and monies in other things. And it's such a well-rounded program. As somebody who, I think that if I knew this existed when I graduated college, I probably would have done it to give it a go, because you get this whole well-rounded experience and you get, requirements and electives, and wow, what an opportunity. So I highly recommend all you master's students go out and check out this opportunity and other opportunities like it. You've heard on this podcast before where we strongly recommend internships, and AEP is going to be launching a mentorship program where we match people that have opportunities like this with others. Yeah. So this is just, I'm so excited to see this profession grow. And thank you so much for being a part of the leadership and developing the future of our organization and our profession.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, it just comes very, naturally for me, given my background and progression, and there's those icebreaker questions about what else would you, if you didn't do this, what else would you do? And I'm like, I don't know. My answer is always like something in music. Like, I don't know, maybe be a roadie or something. Who knows?
Yeah. And there's still time. There's still time. Right? Speaking of time, we are at our time together, unless you have any final announcements you'd like to make or topics to touch on before Jessa kicks in the wrap up rapid five.
Yeah, I just kind of one that I touched upon a little bit, but I really see those, in the industry kind of really grappling with are these issues of kind of racial equity. Our city has a racial equity and reconciliation plan. Every department has racial equity champions. There's a lot of work happening here and other places around this topic. And it really comes through, I think, in a lot of the planning space, not just park planning, but in others. And so, whether it's the management assistant program or your entry-level job or a work with a nonprofit or community-based organization, this is going to be something that the next generation and even our current generation is going to need to learn how to be competent at. And this is really about, it stems from, kind of, if you look at root cause analysis, a lot of our land use and how we decide upon land and what's valuable really stems from this issue of redlining, where federal housing policies indicated where areas were valuable and where they were not valuable to buy or invest based on the demographics and race of people who live there. There's some really great books and resources about this, out in the world that I encourage folks to pay attention to. But even some of our decisions that we make today are still fundamentally based on some of those really structurally racist policies. And so as we're thinking about, my former role about how and where we acquire land and build parks and how we even co-create those spaces with our community and what is culturally relevant and meaningful to different members of our community that might come from different places. Long Beach has the largest population of Cambodians outside of Cambodia. And what Cambodia town and those residents want and feel comfortable with may be very different than other places. And so I think this aspect of really diving into and not just sort of being woke, so to speak, but actually really talking the talk and walking the walk and understanding what it means to change structures so that we don't continue to perpetuate racial inequities is going to be a large part of this work when it comes to planning and land use and other environmental justice type issues. And so I know your members and many others in your industry and the spaces and places I spent my time, we were really trying to grapple with this topic. And so I think understanding a lot of the aspects of culture really plays into kind of thinking about things not just being kind of a technical expert and being skilled technically. That's always important, but sort of this aspect of cultural competency and understanding the history and the story of racial equity and what it has led to in our country and what it has led to at the local jurisdiction where you work, like I do, or whether you work in an industry that works with lots of local jurisdictions. There's a lot to unpack there. And the more prepared and educated you are in that area, I think is going to be really valuable as an employee for an employer in the future, and probably should have been for a very long time. But I know that that's something that we spend a lot of time working on. We do in our organization, but a lot of the work I did previously in park planning was around kind of this not perpetuating past racial inequity and thinking about how best to serve our community in that way.
Did they, in your education, I know you got a bachelor's and you got a couple certificates and Pepperdine and a master's at Carnegie. I mean, impressive. Do they talk about these topics in your academic life, or was this something that was introduced to you via the open space and parks planning pathway?
Yeah, I think there was some initial things that, and it was more under the guise of like diversity at the time that I was going through school. I do have a minor in my undergrad of organizational communication. So it came up in some of those, being culturally competent, talking to different levels of the organization, different cultures, like what is expected, in that capacity. So it was peppered throughout, but it wasn't closely tied to this concept of kind of white supremacy and individuals who feel a particular way, creating structures, and those structures then are inequitable and they perpetuate racism. That particular kind of tie was more about being in the sphere of planning and open space and parks, where you really kind of got to dig into this. And I think a great resource on this is GARE. It's the Government Alliance on Race and Equity. There are many similar types of organizations that exist out in the world, but they were the ones that did a lot of our training here at the city, and we continue to be connected with them. I have a really great kind of resource list, Laurel, that I can send to you and Jessa following this that you're welcome to share with those in AEP. Yes. But they are very kind of local government centric, but certainly still really relevant. So I think the park space is, there's a lot of great things that come from the sphere of planning and parks. That is sort of your applied learning or your experiential learning. That is sometimes far more eye-opening than anything you can get in the classroom, as important as that might be.
I agree. I'm giggling because I got a degree in environmental studies and economics. So it was just the apocalypse, and you kind of you don't truly understand and empathize or find your particular skill set until you give it a go and you really dive in. And I just wanted to highlight that you do have an incredible academic background. You've applied your knowledge and your resources to your career. You've developed into a leadership role. You're making actual will change in the community you grew up in, I can completely understand why the AEP conference recommended that you join us today. I just, hopefully we can have you back again and we can talk again about all the successes that you've witnessed, that you've celebrated, that you've achieved, and maybe the future fellows and what they're doing and what they're up to. I'd love to check back in with you. Thank you so much for being here. I think that that's a great point for a wrap up rapid five now.
Yeah. I mean, how can I say no?
Yes.
Yeah. All right. So first question, what is your favorite daily habit?
My favorite daily habit is gratitude. So really being able to say thank you to others, or, hey, you did a great job. And it doesn't need to be a parade. It doesn't need to be, something that everybody knows about. It could just be that nice thing that you say to that person, because you definitely don't know what their day was like. You don't know what they've been carrying. You don't know what's going on in their life. And sometimes that matters. I think it always matters to some degree, but sometimes it just really, really matters. So I still do written thank you notes to people. And I just, saying thank you is definitely something that is worth celebrating.
Great. 3 things you'd bring to a deserted island.
Oh gosh, thinking about this was so easy. Speakers, something to play music on, and a personal chef. And maybe the personal chef is a little bit of a cheat because that doesn't mean it's a deserted island, but I wouldn't survive unless there was somebody there to provide sustenance, because I am a terrible cook. I do not like it. My husband does all the cooking in the family.
We'll allow it. What is your favorite environmental policy?
Anything related to parks. So park exaction, park dedication, park impact fees, anything that is really about, establishing open space, green space for the community, particularly in areas that have had a lack of investment or disproportionately affected by structural racism. I think that all of that is good. And there's like never an end to the goodness that can bring on a whole host of levels.
Right. Favorite fauna or flora?
Ooh, probably a willow tree. They are resilient. They find water, they volunteer, they bend, but they rarely break. I mentioned at Willow Springs, there's this great grandmother willow, and that's like the first thing that came to mind when I heard the question. And their branches kind of open up and just give you a big old hug. And I think there's something really great about, a big grandmother willow.
Oh, I love that. And last question, finish this thought. Wouldn't it be cool if?
Wouldn't it be cool if I got to hang out with Leslie Knope? I've always thought that could be a lot of fun.
I was thinking about her this entire podcast, and I was like, don't say it, Jessa, don't say it.
I mean, you can't not be a fan of the show if you work in the parks and recreation industry. And it's funny because the show being filmed in LA, in many cases, did have some park cameos from Long Beach in it. So you can always tell. You're like, ooh, I know which one that is. So it's a lot of fun to see, a show like that. It's ridiculous, but it also very closely, aligns with a lot of the stuff that is very real for people in the industry. And so, it's fun to think about, maybe having lunch with Leslie Knope.
Love it. Thank you so much, Meredith. We loved having you.
Sure.
Grateful for you. Gratitude. Thank you so much for being here. Yes. And Meredith, everyone. Very impressive. Thank you. Until next time.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. As a new podcast, it really helps us if you share with friends and colleagues that may enjoy this podcast as well. And please subscribe or follow the podcast to be alerted for new episodes. Also, if you want to submit a shout out, please send a voice memo under a minute, ideally to podcast with an S at CALIFAEP.org. Again, that's podcast at CALIFAEP.org, or any feedback that you'd like to share. We love feedback. Thank you.